Mark Jensen never thought he'd see Rex again. After all, the bond they shared in the battlefield was supposed to be broken by time, distance, and the chaos of life after war. But there was something in the air that day, a strange kind of quiet that seemed to hold a secret. Mark had returned to his small apartment after a long deployment, the weight of the years heavy on his shoulders. The laughter, the camaraderie, all felt like distant memories. Rex, his German Shepherd K9 partner, had been lost in the fog of war, leaving a void in Mark's life no one could fill. But that morning, Mark's routine walk would change everything. The city was still, and the cold breeze of early winter whispered through the empty streets. Mark didn't expect anything. He had grown accustomed to the silence. Yet, as he passed the old park where he and Rex used to train together, something caught his eye. A shadow. A movement. A figure so familiar it almost didn't seem real. His heart skipped a beat. There, standing just beyond the gates, was a dog. The same sturdy, confident posture. The same knowing gaze. Mark's mind raced. Could it really be? Could it be Rex? The dog's amber eyes met his, and for a brief moment, everything froze. There was no doubt. It was him. Rex had found him. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a miracle. Mark stood frozen, unsure whether to approach or wait, as memories of their time together flooded his mind. Rex had been more than a dog. He had been his protector, his partner, his best friend. And now, after all these years, here he was again. Mark took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. As if sensing his hesitation, Rex gave a soft bark and moved toward him, his tail wagging slightly, a hint of excitement in his movements. Mark dropped to one knee, extending his hand slowly, the air thick with emotion. The moment their hands met, the world seemed to vanish around them. There were no words, just the overwhelming sense of connection, of a bond that time and distance couldn't break. Rex nudged Mark's face with his cold nose, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mark felt whole again. The days of loneliness, the grief, the pain of losing his partner in arms, they all melted away. Rex was back. The quiet loyalty of a dog, the kind of bond that didn't need words to be understood, was stronger than anything else. Mark couldn't stop the tears from flowing. He never thought he'd be given this second chance. But here it was. Rex had found his way back home. Mark stood there, kneeling in the middle of the park, his hand extended toward Rex. His heart raced, unsure whether it was from the overwhelming emotion or the sudden realization that this moment was happening. The years of wondering, the sleepless nights, the longing for his old friend, seemed like distant memories now. Here Rex was, standing right before him, as if time had never passed. The cold winter air brushed against his face, but it didn't matter. Everything felt warm. Rex stepped forward, his large frame moving with purpose, and with a deep breath, Mark finally let out the words he had been holding back. "You came back," he whispered. Rex didn't need words. Instead, he leaned forward, pressing his head into Mark's hand, his tail wagging with gentle enthusiasm. Mark felt a lump in his throat as he scratched the familiar spot behind Rex's ears. It felt like no time had passed at all. The bond between them had never faded. Mark had always known that Rex was more than just a partner on the battlefield. He was a companion, a true friend, one who had watched over him in the darkest times. As Rex sat by his side, Mark's mind began to race with memories of their past missions together. The training, the countless hours spent working side by side, the victories they had shared. They had been through so much together, but it was the quiet moments, like this one, that truly defined their relationship. Mark stood up slowly, still in disbelief, as Rex looked up at him with those amber eyes that had seen everything. "How did you find me?" Mark muttered to himself, more out of awe than curiosity. Rex's response was simple, a low whine, followed by a soft nudge against Mark's leg, as if to say, "I never left." It was a moment of pure, unconditional loyalty. Mark couldn't help but smile, the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. He had thought he would never get this chance. He had thought Rex was gone forever, lost to time and distance. But here he was, standing before him, a testament to the power of loyalty and love. For a long while, neither of them moved. They just stood there, taking in the moment. Mark's hand rested on Rex's back, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing grounding him in the present. He knew that, no matter what the future held, this moment would be enough. In the end, It wasn't about the missions, the victories, or the struggles. It was about the unwavering connection between a Marine and his K9, a bond that time couldn't break. Rex was back, and that was all that mattered. Mark sat on the park bench, his fingers gently brushing through Rex's fur as the dog lay beside him. The world felt quieter now, as if everything had paused in reverence for the reunion that had just taken place. It was hard to believe how much time had passed since he last saw Rex. Yet here they were, as if no time had separated them at all. Mark stared out at the trees, the same ones that had witnessed their countless training sessions, and felt a sense of peace wash over him. Rex let out a soft sigh, resting his head on Mark's knee, his body relaxed in a way Mark hadn't seen in years. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted from both their shoulders. Mark hadn't realized how much he needed this moment until now. The grief of the past years, the loneliness, the uncertainty, all melted away in the presence of his old friend. He gently patted Rex's head and spoke softly, as if to himself, "We made it, buddy. We made it through everything." The dog's eyes flicked up at him, the amber gaze filled with an understanding that only a true companion could possess. It was in that moment that Mark realized that Rex had always been there for him, not just as a working partner, but as a friend, someone who had shared in his pain, his struggles, and his victories. Rex's loyalty had never wavered, even when the odds seemed impossible. Mark's thoughts drifted back to the battlefield, the many times Rex had saved him, the times when the dog's instincts and sharp senses had guided them both through danger. There was no other bond like the one between a Marine and his K9. It was forged in the most difficult of circumstances, tested in the heat of battle, and only grew stronger with time. And now, it was clear that this bond had transcended the battlefield. It had become something deeper, something that could not be broken by time or distance. Mark looked down at Rex, his heart full of gratitude and love. "You've always been there for me," he whispered. Rex didn't need words to respond. Instead, the dog gave a gentle nudge, as if to say, "And I always will be." Mark smiled, the weight of the years finally lifting. They didn't need anything else, just each other. They were a team once more. And this time, they would never be separated again. Mark and Rex spent the next few weeks rediscovering their rhythm together, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. Mark had learned to live with the quiet, the lonely silence that used to consume him, but now it was different. With Rex by his side, the silence was comforting, a peaceful presence that filled the spaces between words. The days felt lighter, as if Rex had not only returned as a companion, but as a reminder of what it meant to keep going, no matter the odds. They spent their mornings walking around the neighborhood, Mark allowing himself to breathe deeply for the first time in years. Rex, always by his side, seemed to enjoy the simple pleasure of these quiet moments, the same moments they used to share before the war. The world had changed, but their bond remained the same. Mark began to feel a new sense of purpose. His life was no longer defined by the events of the past. Instead, it was defined by the small joys, the sound of Rex's paws on the pavement, the gentle nudge of his nose, the way the dog seemed to understand him in ways no one else could. It was a bond that went beyond words. One afternoon, as they walked down their usual route, Mark paused to take in the view of the sunset. The sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, the kind of sunset that always made him feel small in the grand scheme of things. But this time, standing there with Rex by his side, he didn't feel alone. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt that everything was right in the world. Rex sat down beside him, as if to say, "I'm here." Mark smiled and reached down, giving him a gentle pat on the head. "I'm so glad you're back," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rex's ears perked up at the sound of Mark's voice, and he looked up at him with those amber eyes that had always seen more than anyone else could. Mark felt his heart swell with gratitude. The years apart hadn't erased the love they shared. It had only made it stronger. They had both been through so much, but now, they were here, together. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Rex would always be by his side, a constant in a world that often felt unpredictable. The sun sank lower, and Mark felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. With Rex there, nothing else mattered. They were a team, and they always would be. Mark and Rex's bond deepened with each passing day. As they spent more time together, Mark began to realize just how much he had missed these simple moments. Moments that, before Rex's return, had felt like distant memories. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the stars slowly fill the sky, Mark felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. The quiet of the night was broken only by the soft sound of Rex's breathing, steady and calm. It was in these moments, with Rex lying at his feet, that Mark felt the healing begin. Rex, ever the loyal companion, seemed to sense when Mark needed comfort and when he just needed someone to be there. Mark thought about the days before, when he had struggled with the weight of his memories, unable to find peace. The loss of Rex had left a hole that nothing seemed to fill. But now, with Rex by his side again, that hole was slowly being filled with something new, hope. It wasn't a loud, dramatic kind of hope. It was quiet, gentle, like the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. But it was there, and for the first time in a long time, Mark believed that things could be different. One morning, as they walked along the familiar path near their home, Mark noticed a shift in himself. He was no longer walking in the shadow of his past, weighed down by the loss of what he had once known. Instead, he was walking forward, with Rex by his side, ready to face whatever the future held. The change was subtle, but it was there. With Rex's unwavering loyalty and presence, Mark felt a sense of stability he hadn't realized he was missing. As they continued their walk, Mark allowed himself to think about the future. What would it look like now, with Rex by his side? He no longer felt the pressure to have everything figured out. Instead, he was learning to take each day as it came, finding joy in the small moments that had once passed him by. Rex, as always, was there, guiding him forward with nothing more than his quiet presence. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. Mark knew that. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't walking it alone. Rex had returned, and together, they would face whatever came next, side by side. The bond they shared was unbreakable, stronger than anything that could come their way. Mark glanced down at Rex, who was looking up at him with those familiar amber eyes, and smiled. The future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. With Rex by his side, Mark knew that they could handle anything that life threw at them. Mark woke up to the sound of Rex's paws tapping lightly against the wooden floor, a familiar sound that brought a sense of comfort. It was still early in the morning, the sky painted in shades of soft blue, and the world outside his window was quiet. Mark had grown used to the calm that Rex brought into his life, a calm that had been absent for far too long. As he stretched and rose from the bed, he caught sight of Rex sitting by the window, his amber eyes fixed on the horizon, always alert, always present. Mark knew that Rex had been through more than any dog should ever have to endure, but despite the hardships, the dog's loyalty had never wavered. Rex had returned to him, not just as a companion, but as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that no matter how many battles life threw at them, they would always have each other. Mark walked over to Rex, reaching down to ruffle the dog's fur. Rex turned his head, giving Mark a look of quiet understanding, as if saying, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Mark smiled, feeling the warmth of the dog's presence. It was in moments like this, when the world seemed to stand still, that Mark felt the weight of everything he had been through. The past few months had been a journey of healing, both for him and for Rex. They had spent so many years apart, each of them struggling in their own way, but now, here they were, together again. It wasn't just the big moments that mattered. It was the small ones, like these mornings when they simply sat together, enjoying the peace of each other's company. Mark couldn't help but feel grateful. He had thought that his life would never feel complete again after losing Rex, but now, with the dog by his side, he realized that maybe this was exactly how it was supposed to be. The days of silence and solitude were fading, replaced by a sense of purpose, a purpose that he hadn't realized he had been missing. As Mark prepared to go out for their morning walk, Rex stood up, his tail wagging slightly, eager as always. It was as if the dog could sense that Mark was ready to take the next step, ready to embrace the future without fear. Together, they walked out the door and into the world, side by side, no longer weighed down by the past. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but with Rex there, Mark knew they would face it together, just as they always had. The world outside felt a little brighter that day, and for the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Mark and Rex had settled into a new rhythm, one that felt comfortable and natural, as if they had never been apart. Each morning, they ventured out into the world, side by side, and each walk brought them closer to a future neither of them had ever imagined. For Mark, the world seemed more vibrant, more full of promise. The pain and loneliness that had once consumed him were now distant memories, replaced by the quiet companionship of his loyal dog. Rex, as always, remained by his side, steadfast and unwavering. One afternoon, as they walked through a local park, Mark noticed how different everything seemed now. The trees, the flowers, the people going about their daily lives. Everything had a new sense of clarity. He realized that his perspective had shifted, that he was no longer weighed down by the ghosts of the past. With Rex there, he could finally look ahead, instead of constantly being pulled back into what had been. As they strolled through the park, Mark couldn't help but smile as he watched Rex's playful energy. The dog was always so full of life, his tail wagging, his eyes bright with excitement. Mark had always admired Rex's ability to live in the moment, to find joy in the simplest things. It was a lesson Mark had been slow to learn, but now, with Rex by his side, he was beginning to understand. Rex had a way of reminding him to slow down, to appreciate the little things that so often went unnoticed. Mark had spent so many years caught up in the rush of life, trying to outrun the pain and grief that followed him everywhere. But now, with Rex, he found himself savoring the present. As they reached the edge of the park, Mark paused to take a deep breath. The cool air filled his lungs, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Rex, sensing the stillness in Mark, stopped beside him, as if to share in the moment. There, together, they stood quietly, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was a moment of pure tranquility, one that Mark had never imagined he would experience again. It was in these moments, these quiet pauses in the day, that Mark found the most healing. The simple presence of Rex, the bond they shared, had brought him back to life in ways he never thought possible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. He looked down at Rex, who was gazing up at him with those amber eyes, filled with understanding and love. Mark reached down to pet Rex's head, his hand lingering for a moment. "Thank you," Mark whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rex didn't need to respond. The connection between them was enough. In that moment, Mark knew that, no matter what the future held, he and Rex would face it together, side by side. Mark and Rex had found a new rhythm, one where the days flowed naturally, unhurried and free of the weight of the past. They had been through so much together, but now, the world felt lighter, more full of possibilities. Mark's days were no longer defined by the heaviness that had once clouded his thoughts. With Rex by his side, everything had changed. It was not just the walks in the park, the quiet mornings, or the peaceful nights. It was something deeper. It was the way Rex made him feel grounded, the way the dog's presence seemed to make everything else fade into the background. Mark no longer felt like he was fighting against the world. With Rex, it was as though he had found a partner, someone who understood without words, someone who had been through the fire with him and had come out stronger. They had both learned to adapt, to find peace in the stillness, to enjoy the simple moments that life offered. One evening, after a long day, Mark found himself sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in deep shades of purple and orange, and the world seemed to hold its breath as the day came to a close. Rex sat beside him, his body relaxed, his eyes alert as always. Mark had come to appreciate these moments of quiet, these times when nothing needed to be said. It was enough just to be together. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Mark muttered to Rex, more to himself than to the dog. Rex turned his head and nudged Mark's hand, a gesture of affection, of understanding. It was as if the dog knew exactly what Mark was feeling. The bond between them was unspoken, but it was as strong as anything Mark had ever experienced. It was the kind of connection that transcended words, the kind of connection that only came from shared experiences, from facing challenges together, and from knowing that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. Mark reached down and scratched Rex behind the ears, feeling the warmth of the dog's fur beneath his fingertips. There was a sense of peace in that moment, a sense of gratitude for all that had come before and all that was yet to come. He wasn't sure what the future held, but with Rex by his side, he knew he could face anything. The sun continued to set, casting its final rays of light across the landscape, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the dramatic moments. It was about the quiet companionship, the gentle presence of the dog who had always been there, the one who never gave up. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Mark felt a sense of calm settle over him. The journey had been long, but it had led him to this moment, and with Rex by his side, he was ready for whatever the future held. Mark sat on the porch, his gaze drifting over the landscape. The past few weeks had been peaceful, but it wasn't the quiet moments that marked the real change in him. It was the way he had started to feel more alive, more present. He could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the soft chirping of birds in the distance, and it was all so familiar, so grounding. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt at home in the world around him. Rex, as always, was by his side, sitting patiently on the steps, his eyes scanning the surroundings, ever vigilant. It was that sense of quiet companionship that had carried Mark through the toughest times. He had never imagined how much a dog could change his life, how much one animal could restore what had been lost. Rex was not just a pet. He was a constant. He was a reminder of what loyalty truly meant. As Mark's thoughts wandered, he smiled down at Rex. "You've been my rock," he said softly. Rex turned his head and gave Mark a gentle nudge with his nose, as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." The words didn't need to be spoken aloud. It was in the little things. In the way Rex always knew when Mark needed comfort. In the way he stuck by his side no matter what. Mark had spent years running from his feelings, from the ghosts of the past that haunted him, but now he was learning to face them head on. With Rex beside him, he felt ready for whatever came next. They had been through so much together, and now, Mark had a sense of peace he never thought possible. As the evening sun began to dip below the horizon, Mark stood up and stretched, feeling the cool air against his skin. Rex followed suit, standing up and wagging his tail, always ready for the next adventure. "Let's go for a walk," Mark said, his voice steady, full of certainty. They had walked this path countless times before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, Mark didn't feel weighed down by the past. He felt free. As they walked together, the sky overhead turned shades of orange and purple, the colors of a day coming to an end. Mark didn't know what the future held, but with Rex by his side, he felt more prepared to face it than ever before. The world was full of uncertainties, but in that moment, all that mattered was the bond they shared, the bond that had carried them through the darkest of times. And as they walked into the evening, side by side, Mark knew that they were ready for whatever came next. Mark and Rex had settled into a routine, one that felt more like a partnership than anything else. The quiet, peaceful days spent together had become a sanctuary from the chaos that once consumed him. Mark no longer felt the weight of the past hanging over him, and it was all because of Rex. The dog's loyalty had done more for Mark than he could have ever imagined. It had given him the strength to move forward, to embrace the present, and to trust again. One morning, Mark stood at the window, looking out over the quiet street. The sun was still low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over everything. Rex was beside him, as always, sitting patiently, watching the world outside. It was a feeling of peace that Mark had longed for, but never thought he would find. As he turned to look at Rex, Mark couldn't help but smile. The bond they shared was unspoken, but it was stronger than anything he had ever known. Rex had been his constant companion, his protector, and his friend. And now, after all they had been through, Mark knew that he would never be alone again. He reached down to pet Rex's head, feeling the familiar warmth of the dog's fur. Rex looked up at him with those amber eyes, as if to reassure him that everything was going to be okay. "Thank you," Mark whispered, his voice filled with emotion. Rex didn't need words to respond. Instead, the dog leaned in closer, resting his head against Mark's hand, offering comfort in the way only a dog could. Mark knew that this was what mattered. This bond, this connection, it was all that he needed. The rest of the world could wait. With Rex by his side, Mark felt ready for anything. He didn't know what the future held, but he was no longer afraid of it. Whatever came next, he and Rex would face it together. And that was enough. As the day began to unfold, Mark and Rex stepped outside, ready for whatever the world had in store for them. Together, they walked into the day, side by side, knowing that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. The days had begun to blend together in a comfortable routine. Mark and Rex spent their mornings walking through the neighborhood, enjoying the simple moments that had once felt so distant. Mark had started to take notice of the small details, the way the light filtered through the trees, the sound of Rex's paws against the pavement, the fresh, crisp air of the early mornings. It was all so ordinary, yet with Rex by his side, it felt extraordinary. Mark could see the change in himself. The man who had once been consumed by the past, lost in the shadows of memories that refused to let him go, was now able to look forward. Rex had become more than just a dog. He had become a lifeline, a constant reminder that life, no matter how difficult, could always offer moments of peace. One day, as they walked along the same path they had walked countless times before, Mark felt something shift within him. It wasn't a grand epiphany, but a quiet realization that he had found something he had been searching for without even knowing it. The peace he had longed for, the sense of purpose that had always eluded him, was right here, in the bond he shared with Rex. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the heroic moments. It was about the everyday, the unspoken connection that was stronger than anything else. Rex had never asked for anything in return. He had given Mark his loyalty, his companionship, his unwavering presence, and in return, Mark had learned to embrace life once again. As the sun dipped low in the sky one evening, Mark sat on the porch, his hand resting on Rex's back as the dog sat next to him. The world was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Mark felt completely at ease. It was the kind of peace that only comes when you know you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Rex let out a soft sigh, resting his head on Mark's knee. There was a calm in the air, a sense of contentment that Mark had never thought he would experience again. He looked down at Rex, who was gazing up at him with those amber eyes full of trust and understanding. Mark smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. They had been through so much together, and yet, here they were. Together. That was all that mattered. The future was uncertain, but with Rex at his side, Mark knew he could face it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as they always had. Mark reached down to scratch Rex behind the ears, feeling the warmth of the dog's fur under his fingers. The simple act brought a sense of comfort, a reminder that this bond was something unbreakable. As the evening settled in, Mark knew that this was where he was meant to be. Here, with Rex, living in the moment and letting the future unfold on its own time. As time passed, Mark and Rex continued their peaceful life together, each day adding another layer to their unbreakable bond. The days felt like a slow, calming rhythm, punctuated only by the simple joys of shared moments. The mornings, filled with the sound of birds singing and the quiet shuffle of Rex's paws on the pavement, were no longer just the start of another day. They were a reminder that life was full of beauty, even in the quietest of times. One afternoon, as they walked through a nearby park, Mark couldn't help but reflect on just how far they had come. It had been a long journey from the chaos of the past, and sometimes he still couldn't believe how much things had changed. But with Rex by his side, it all felt possible. It wasn't just the moments of peace or the walks they shared. It was the way Rex had become a part of the fabric of his life, a constant presence that had allowed Mark to finally begin healing. Mark had spent years trying to outrun the pain of his past, but Rex had quietly taught him to face it, to accept it, and to move forward. The dog never judged him, never asked for anything in return, except for the simple act of being present. As the sun began to set, Mark found himself standing by a small pond, watching the reflection of the sky on the water's surface. Rex, ever the loyal companion, sat by his side, his eyes watching the water, but his focus never straying far from Mark. There was something about the stillness of the moment that reminded Mark of everything he had been through and how far he had come. The soft rustling of the trees, the gentle ripples in the pond, and the warm glow of the setting sun created a peaceful aura around them. Mark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had found peace in a way he never thought possible, and it was all because of Rex. In the past, Mark had been consumed by the grief of losing his partner in the field, but now, he understood that Rex hadn't just been a dog. He had been a lifeline, a companion that had silently guided him back to a place of strength and peace. Looking down at Rex, Mark whispered, "I don't know how I got so lucky, but I'm thankful every day that you came back." Rex tilted his head slightly, his amber eyes locking with Mark's, as if understanding every word. Mark smiled, his heart full. They had both been through so much. And yet, here they were, standing together in this quiet moment, no longer haunted by the past. They were ready for whatever came next, together. The future was uncertain, but with Rex by his side, Mark knew he could handle anything. And so, they continued to walk through life, side by side, knowing that no matter where the journey took them, they would always have each other. Mark and Rex sat quietly on the porch as the days passed, each one marked by the peacefulness that had become their new normal. For the first time in years, Mark was not haunted by the memories of the past. The silence was no longer oppressive, it was comfortable, even soothing. The pain that once seemed so overwhelming had faded, replaced by a quiet contentment. Mark glanced at Rex, who was lying next to him, his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed in relaxation. There was a sense of peace in the way Rex simply existed, steady, loyal, and always by Mark's side. It was a peace that Mark had longed for but never thought he could have again. Their lives together had become a simple routine. Morning walks, quiet afternoons, evenings spent watching the sunset together. Mark never took these moments for granted. He knew how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could change. But with Rex, he had found something unshakable. It was a bond that transcended time, a connection that only grew stronger with each passing day. The bond between a Marine and his K9 was something extraordinary, and Mark had never fully understood its depth until now. Rex had been his partner, his protector, his friend. Through every challenge, every hardship, they had been there for each other, and now, after everything they had endured, they were finally at peace. Mark reached down and gently scratched Rex behind the ears, feeling the warmth of the dog's fur beneath his hand. Rex lifted his head, looking up at Mark with those amber eyes full of understanding. Mark smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude. "We've been through so much," Mark said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But we made it. We're here, together." Rex's tail gave a slight wag, as if to say, "I'm here, always." Mark let out a breath, feeling the weight of the years lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he felt completely at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he no longer feared it. With Rex by his side, Mark knew they could face anything that came their way. The world outside might be uncertain, but the bond they shared was something solid, something unbreakable. As the sun set on another day, Mark and Rex sat side by side, content in the quiet stillness of their lives. They had found something special, something rare, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. And in that moment, Mark knew that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. Together, they had found a new beginning. A beginning that was defined not by the battles they fought, but by the love and loyalty that had carried them through it all.